This story about primary and secondary education in Taiwan has a shocking murder in it. This is just a small report from the front lines of education. Nothing more, nothing less. So a few years ago, I was hanging around in Taipei studying Mandarin, and someone in a hostel, wherever, just casually asked me if I wanted to go teach at this XYZ Language Institute, pick up a few extra bucks. They needed part-time teachers. And there are zillions of these kiddie institutes. They're these after-school language institutes for kids maybe ages 6 through 12. And I said, sure. So I went to work at the XYZ Institute. They had classes I think I was teaching like 3 times a week to this particular group or these groups. And 3 times a week, like 2 hours on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and then also on Saturday mornings. I remember one day I was actually taking the bus to work, in the afternoon, and I saw a little kid on the bus who was also headed to the Institute. He was wearing the little branded, whatever, jacket or, windbreaker, and had his little branded book bag. And the kid was just, he had his arms around the book bag, and his head was absolutely limp. He was sound asleep. He was zonked out. He had finished this exhausting day at school, and he was off for another 2 hours of rigorous English training. Now, I'm going to call it training, not instruction, because the curriculum consisted of dialogues and spelling lists. The dialogues were these very simple, like A, B exchanges. What did you do this weekend? I went with my friend to see an exciting movie. What did you eat? We had hamburgers and rice. And there would be an associated spelling list. And these kids would be responsible for writing out all these dialogues in English and the International Phonetic Alphabet. This is the International Phonetic Alphabet for the words I am saying now. You normally only see it in dictionaries, or the other people who ever use it are linguists or teachers, but these kids had to use all these symbols. So the way the class was conducted, there was a Chinese teacher and a Native American English-speaking teacher like me. The Chinese teacher would give all the instructions. She would make sure she collected the homework, and I would actually dictate the words for the spelling test, and I would model these dialogues. Model, repeat. Model, repeat. So, what did you do this weekend? What did you do this weekend? I went with my friend to see an exciting movie. I went with my friend to see an exciting movie. On and on. We would do this for about an hour, going through maybe 5 dialogues over and over and over. And at some point they were tested on their recitation. I didn't do the testing on their recitation. Someone else did. It might have been the director. I can't remember who, but they would have to get these words right. And that was the challenge, because they had no idea what they were saying. I used to go around the rows making sure, that these kids, that their lips were matching the words, because they would often transpose consonants, or they would drop consonants or something, because they didn't know what these words meant. It was all Martian or dog to them. And this is not by any means the fault of those kids, that they were memorizing dialogue after dialogue after dialogue, and they could not hold any conversational English at all. And during every session, during every 2 hours, the director of the institute would do a circuit through all the classes, and he would have with him the records from from the previous session, which showed the spelling test scores, the homework, whatever score, and also the recitation scores. And any kid who had not come up to a certain level got punished. So he would just kind of come into the classroom unannounced, oh, here he comes. And he would have some papers with him. He'd be looking over this, and he'd start calling names out loud. So-and-so, so-and-so. And all these kids they'd come up and line up in front of him. And there might be, 7 kids out of a class of 40, something like that. And then he would pull out this, imagine like this much of an axe handle. An axe handle, I think. It was this piece of wood that was maybe about that thick, this wide. The thing looked dense and solid. And the kids would have to count to 5 while he whacked them. They would have to count to 5 between each whack. So, he would finish his little lecture and then just, give me your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whack! 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whack! And so on up to 5. Now, remember, this piece of wood, it was not like a ruler. I've tested out this, I tested the whole thing out. I whacked my hand with a ruler, and I guess it stings, but this big, thick piece of wood was more like whacking your hand with a rolling pin, and that can actually do soft tissue damage. Now, go figure, some of these kids took it in stride. They would just, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and, when their punishment was up, they would go back to their desk and take out a tin of tiger balm and just... But some kids cannot really take it. I mean, it was not only the physical pain, but the shame, the humiliation, and the fear. There was one little girl in particular, I will never forget her. I remember her name, I remember her face. She was always very neat. She, just neat hair with a little barrette, and her mother had dressed her very nicely, like cute little dress, little floral dresses, and her little white socks. She looked very feminine and dainty and delicate. And she couldn't take the beatings. She just wasn't that good. She wasn't that fast, and she worked hard. Maybe once every 2 weeks, she was summoned up for a whacking. And in her case, it was like, she would be standing there trembling. The tears would be coming up in her eyes as she approached this guy. And when he told her to hold out her hand, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whack! 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whack! 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whack! And when it was over, she would just put her hands by her sides and just go back to her desk and sit down and just head down, tears coming down her eyes, going through note cards here. Then there was the abused kid. That's another kid I'll never forget. This one kid who came in every time not neat at all. His hair was kind of, I don't know, someone had cut it with a, pair of garden shears or something, and it was always dirty. He was always unwashed. He would be wearing a dirty t-shirt 3 sizes too big for him. And he was always messing up. He was such a regular wacky, and his offenses were so big that the director would actually take this kid into his office for especially severe private punishment sessions. And that kid also used to come to school with bruises and cuts on him. He came in one time just so cut up and scabbed up that one of the American teachers said, Johnny, were you attacked by a dog? She literally thought that he was attacked by an animal. And one of the Chinese teachers said, no, his mother did that. That was the kid. Oh, then there was the kid who didn't want to come. It was the first day of a session, and the mother was bringing in this girl about 7 years old, I think. She was a tough little kid, and she did not want to come to an English class. And it was like a scene out of a cartoon. I mean, first the kid is grabbing onto the door frames, and her mother is like yanking on that, her waistband of her pants, pulling her legs, and this kid's going, no! And well, except she was just screaming. And anyway, finally, the mother would pry her. She would get one hand pried off, the other hand pried off, and then the kid braces herself between 2 other doors, and the mother manages to, she breaks her hold by pushing her back. And the next thing you know, the kid's got herself wrapped around a couch or something. The mom is pulling by the straps on her book bag, and then I remember that the kid dug her feet into the carpet this way, kind of wedging herself against the floor, and the mom was trying to pry her off the floor. I was pulling for the kid. Anyway, the Institute, I can't remember whether I said, basically ran from something like ages 6 through 12, or maybe 8 through 12. Anyway, it ended at the age of 12, like the American equivalent of 6th grade, because there was this general recognition that after that time, kids were not going to put up with this rote bullshit. They might even, by that time, God forbid, have learned some conversational English at some point, and they might even talk back to the American teachers. So 12 years old and they're out. And then I found out the hardship begins. When they got to high school, that's where the punishment would get real. I was told by any number of my Taiwanese and long-term American friends over there that the high school scene made this XYZ Institute look like, child's play. The classroom discipline, the physical abuse, the emotional abuse, the psychological abuse would get amped up. I never saw it myself, but I heard it over and over. But some kids would get out earlier than others because Taiwan then, and possibly still now, has this 2-track secondary education system, which is something like my impression of the British system, in which The kids who had excelled earlier on would be tracked for college prep for a professional life, and the kids who didn't basically would be tracked for they would get out at the age of maybe like 15 or 16. It would be the equivalent of an American 10th grader, while the other ones would stay in until American 12th grade, like 17 or 18. So also during this stay in Taiwan, a couple of teenage girls went missing. They were two girls from the same neighborhood, went missing at the same time, and they were in the in this less advanced group. They would have been out of school at 15 or 16. In fact, I think they might have been younger than that even, but they were not in school. And they were gone. They were just missing for about a week, and then their bodies turned up, dumped on the side of a road. So the investigation came to center on the other kids in the neighborhood, and it turns out that in this particular neighborhood, and for all I know, a lot of other Taiwanese neighborhoods, there were not exactly gangs. I mean, the way we think of gangs where they have turf and it's all about who sells what, where, who deals which. These are just cliques or, groups where you're with these people and you hate those people, and you're with those people so you hate these people. And it turned out that one or both of these girls, it all started with a girl stealing a cell phone or being accused of stealing being suspected of stealing a cell phone or falsely accusing someone of stealing, a cell phone. So it wound up with that girl and another one being abducted by this big gang of kids. There were maybe 8 or 9 of them, teenagers. And they managed to grab these girls and detain them somewhere right in the neighborhood and torture them for like 5 or 6 days. Some of these tortures, don't worry, I'm not going to name them, I have not heard of before or since. When I was reading these things, I was... How did these little kids even think these things up? You can Google all kinds of horrible things like fed to piranhas or fed to shark, but you cannot even find Google results for what these girls were subjected to. But anyway, they died. And one of the major causes of the outrage on the part of cops and prosecutors was how easy it was to conduct this investigation. I mean, it was at first there might have been some lies or denials, but then the kids opened up and they were quite, we did this and we did that, he did this, and then we grabbed them, and then we put them in, and all the things they had done to them. And then once they were dead, now they're in our way. Now they're going to stink the place up. They put them in the car and drove them out and just dumped them out on this road where they were found like that. I mean, the prosecutor noted that they weren't even trying to hide the evidence. They were just trying to get the trash out of the way. Now, the public reaction was also outrage and shock, and it provoked some, national soul searching. And of course, in any case where there's wayward youth, the educational system is always implicated. And one of the first, emphatic waves of protest or reform that was called for was keeping kids in school. I mean, these kids were the ones who were let out early. Their mothers are working in the factory 14 hours a day. There's no supervision. And all these kids can do is just get in trouble. They're not ready for working. They're free. The system is done with them. So the call was to somehow keep kids in school until they're 17, 18, until they are ready to go to work as adults. But the part of this story that caught my eye and that caught my mind was this response to that, which was, no, the education system is the problem. We are creating monsters in the classroom. It's the aggression and the cruelty in the classroom that is turning these kids into abusers. I mean, there's always a threat of it. They can always witness. If it doesn't happen to them, then it is just around the corner. These are movies that you wouldn't even watch, but it was their lives every day. So that call was for changing what happens in Taiwanese classrooms, changing the teachers, changing the directors. And yeah, it fascinated me because it's the first time I had ever seen an education system implicated for being overly zealous in its discipline. Disclaimer, 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 disclaimer. I am not generalizing about Taiwan. I'm not even generalizing about its education system. I am simply, like I said, I didn't even see all this with my own eyes. I heard, I read about it and I heard about it from people, but I can't claim to have witnessed whatever goes on in their high schools. Also, I loved the Taiwanese. I loved my stay there. I mean, so many of them were so hospitable and friendly. I would not call them a nation of abuse victims. Another thing is that I do have Taiwanese friends, and I never mentioned this specific case to them or you know, quizzed them about their high school experiences, but they did just kind of brush off these childhood hardships. I mean, they would say, well, you just study. I mean, it wasn't even that hard. Just study, just do the work, and you're good. Their biggest complaint might have been something like boredom, or maybe the material wasn't so relevant. They didn't have complaints that aligned with some of the things I had heard and read. But even if everything I did hear and did read was true, just set all, I am not here to judge. The purpose of this is not to judge, just to tell you what I saw. I'm not making any comparisons. I'm not holding up any other, you know, educational system as a model. And in fact, I think some of my Chinese friends might be horrified to hear some of the soul-damaging and mind-wasting experiences I had in Catholic schools.